thrilling new sound.
shit. That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Did you know? I am a catalyst for change.
I'm a catalyst for change.
I am a catalyst for change.
I am a catalyst for change.
I am most definitely a catalyst for change.
Welcome to the C2HR conference. I'm Scott Porter, and it's my honor to co-chair this year's conference with Julie Nienath. I had to be honest, when we started the planning for this year's conference in January, we obviously had no idea what 2020 had in store for us. But an amazing group of committee members pivoted on a dime to help us not only take the conference virtual, but rework the entire program to reflect the new dynamics of the workplace. We've got an exciting lineup, but before we get started, we have a special group to celebrate this morning.
We sure do, Scott. We're going to kick off with 3 inspiring stories of corporate social good as shared by C2HR's 2020 Social Impact Award winners. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm Kim Gilmore from A&E Networks, and I am so excited to be able to accept the Social Impact Award on behalf of our Mission to Honor initiative. You know, everything is really different this year, from the way that we're having conferences to the ways that we're shooting these videos, and we certainly can't have events in the way that we're used to. But certain things do remain the same, and one of those is the importance of giving back. And so it's really a privilege to be among such great companies who are devoted to corporate social responsibility. We launched the Mission to Honor initiative as a way to shine a light on people who have served in our country, to inspire people to learn about Veterans Day, to thank those who have served, and then also to learn about all of the many ways that veterans are assets to our society, even after they've left the service officially. So, you know, from the many veterans who are on the front lines of COVID-19 right now, to veterans who are helping with disaster relief, to those who are committed to mental health resources for their fellow veterans. Veterans across the board over-index on giving back to our society. So at History Channel and A&E Networks, we're really proud to be able to use this initiative as a way to honor them, and then hopefully to inspire others to connect with veterans in their communities in whatever ways that they can, whether it's learning about what they do, giving back, supporting their organizations, or just thanking the veterans in your area. So thank you on behalf of all of us, and truly, I think that this award is for all of those who have served. You can learn a little bit more about this initiative at veterans.com, and appreciate everybody's support for this initiative and to all of those who have served us so well. Thank you.
Our military veterans fought to protect our rights, liberties,
and freedoms.
This Veterans Day, let's celebrate them.
Along with our active duty military men and women.
By honoring their service,
their patriotism,
and their many contributions to our country.
Because whether we are athletes,
musicians,
gymnasts,
actors,
veterans,
we all support these heroes.
From all of us at History, we salute you and we thank you.
What's great about NBC Universal is they encourage you to go beyond what your job is and really give of yourself to others.
NBC Universal is cultivating this culture to give back to the community.
This kind of investment goes far beyond these individual students and causes a ripple effect in the communities around us.
It's a great feeling to know that NBC is connected with all these organizations.
I'm so excited and so honored to be here for Service Weeks.
Today we're doing the beach cleanup.
We're here building playhouses for children.
We have more than 300 volunteers. They're participating in mural projects, they're building benches.
It's great that we're able to all get together during the workday and come out and make a difference.
1, 2, 3,
To help children, there's nothing more heartwarming for me.
I am so proud to work for a company that lets us inspire young people.
I think you just have to make that first step and do your part, and then everything else will follow.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Richardson, and I'm so delighted to receive this award from C2HR on behalf of all of the employees of ESPN. We have an inherent culture of service here at ESPN. As part of our 40th anniversary celebration, the 40,000 acts of service was a way for us to fully live our mission. Our mission is to serve sports fans anytime, anywhere. Our HR teams, working hand in hand with our corporate citizenship team, use this opportunity to redefine volunteerism. This innovative, flexible approach allowed employees to define what service meant to them and to their communities. The outcome was a highly engaged ESPN employee base. In fact, we saw engagement for volunteerism raised 115%. Our employees, who always go above and beyond, performed over 80,000 acts of service in just a couple of months, doubling our initial goal. And the work continues. During these challenging times, we've transformed our ESPN Serves website into a place where our employees can continue to serve and to give back to their communities virtually. And a huge thank you to the people of ESPN for their continuous generosity and for all of the hard work. And a thank you to C2HR for this tremendous recognition.
At a time when there's so much uncertainty in our world, it's great to reflect on the good that companies across our industry are doing to make the world a better place. Congratulations to A&E, Comcast, NBC Universal, and ESPN. Julie, I know you were instrumental in the selection of our keynote speaker. Would you do the honor of introducing her?
I'd love to, Scott, thanks. So this year, the pace of life, the rate of change in the world has been unreal. We're building a plane while we're flying it, and we're solving problems that never existed before. And more than ever, the HR function is really mission critical to helping our companies navigate our future. The theme this year of our conference is Catalyst for Change, and that's really a nod to all of you helping change the way we work, the way we communicate, and the way we support our employees. We're so fortunate today to have an exciting thought leader with us who knows a thing or two about changing the world. She's a change agent who shows our clients how to unlock new power by really maximizing the power of communication networks and relationships. I'm so excited to announce our conference keynote, the world's leading authority on connectional intelligence, the CEO of a global business consultancy. She's a best-selling author and holds an MPA from Harvard Kennedy School, an MBA from MIT Sloan, and a BS from Wharton School. I am pleased to welcome to our C2HR conference stage, Erica Dhawan. Erica?
Thank you so much, Julie. In the last 8 months, we've seen more disruption and yet more innovation than in perhaps the last 8 years. Leaders have been forced to truly give up some of their power and empower their teams to take ownership. Digital tools that got little traction for years are now business requirements for collaboration, innovation, but also social connection. As we think about moving into the end of the year, as we think about stepping into a new year overall, we all have to ask ourselves through this changing year, how will we not only adapt to the new normal, but how will we create a better normal? How will we make sure that we don't just revert to the old habits and norms that actually weren't working pre-pandemic as well for our businesses and as HR leaders, but really use this moment to not go back, but to go forward, to evolve our organizations, to allow all of our employees to use this moment in time to transform and develop in new ways. As Julie mentioned, my name is Erica Dhawan, and my life's work is to help leaders and teams connect intelligently in our 21st century marketplace. But when it comes to connecting intelligently today, we all know that it's not as easy as it sounds. Let me share a true story between two colleagues, Sarah and John. Now, Sarah and John have been working together for about 6 years, and this is an email exchange between Sarah and John. And the white box is an email exchange between two of them, and the black box is what they actually meant by their email exchanges. So Sarah works for John, and one Wednesday afternoon, she has an idea for a deliverable she's been working on for John. So she shoots off a quick email saying, quick thought, what did you think of this idea for the deliverable? What she really meant was, John, I have an idea. It's not fleshed out yet, but I'd love to get your thoughts before I do more work. At about 8 p.m. that night, after a long day of Zoom fatigue and endless meetings, John gets this email, and he's a bit confused. He thought this deliverable was done, so he didn't understand why Sarah was sending the message now. So he shoots off an email to the point saying, how would this fit in? Doesn't seem like you thought this through, ... What he really meant was, Sarah, you're closer to the work than I am. I need more context from you on what I do with this. At this point, Sarah's putting her 3 kids to bed after a long day. She's frazzled. She can't read the tone of John's message. She thinks John is upset with her. So she spends about 35 minutes late that night crafting a structured email with bold and underlined headings, with 200 words, changing the subject title from quick thought to deliverable changes. By the way, it wasn't ready to be a deliverable change. It needed nuance, it needed brainstorming, it needed discussion, but she felt rushed and concerned about the tone of his message. About 10 minutes later, John reads this note and thinks to himself, this is pretty great. He doesn't say that. He just shoots off some more questions to Sarah, thinking everything's fine. At this point, Sarah's nervous. She's confused. She doesn't know what John is implying with his questions. She waits until the next morning. And the next morning, she sends him a note saying, you know what, can we chat about this before our team meeting tomorrow? Realizing that this email exchange isn't efficient anymore. What she really felt was 5 exclamation points. This isn't productive. John reads this note and thinks to himself, you know what, I want to make sure we're on the same page well before that team meeting tomorrow. So he sent a note saying, actually, can you send your thoughts in writing? What he really meant was, Sarah, you're closer to this work. I would just love to better understand this, especially well before that team meeting. At this point, Sarah's about to have a heart attack. What could have been a 15-minute exchange took 5 hours in that day of time, stress, and fear over a 12-hour period. Now, if you've ever been in this situation before, I want you to go, we have a chat tool, go into the chat tool and say yes, and tell us, who have you been? Have you been Sarah? Have you been John? Or have you been both? We think we have communication down, but it's much harder than we think. The innumerable opportunities to send the wrong signal, to misconstrue one another, has grown to unprecedented levels. Because here's the reality we're facing. We know that roughly 3/4 of face-to-face collaboration is nonverbal, body language, tone, intonation, and gestures. And pre-pandemic already in this industry, roughly 70% of collaboration in teams was virtual. Conference calls, text messages, Microsoft Teams, Slack, you name it. Now that's 100%. And the reality is as we think about what we've learned from this year, the key leadership skill that we have to think about is not just adapting to what is or adapting to remote work, but more importantly, building a better normal for our businesses. Digital communication and collaboration was a challenge pre-pandemic. We were constantly in endless emails or inefficient meetings. We had to deal with duplicative work, cross-team dysfunction and delay. That has grown at new levels. Research shows that when working behind a screen, we're more likely to misunderstand each other with a lack of body language and tone. We're more likely to speak freely, which is sometimes good, but can also create a sense of passive aggression. There's a specific study called the online disinhibition effect that shows that when leaders are communicating behind a screen to the same individuals that they communicate with in person, they are more likely to share less empathy with them just because they're behind a screen. We can argue more. Passive aggressive or not assuming the best intent can shoot up. and we can walk away faster from relationships. Ghosting is not just a personal issue, it's a professional issue as we think about business partner, team relationships, employee engagement, and it can also be a major issue when it comes to selling and marketing in the new age. So today I want to talk about how do we really create that better normal? How do we move past many of the challenges this year? And I just want to give an echo. I have so much praise for HR for this year. This has been a hard year for all of you that have had to really engage your employees and care about their well-being, but also navigate and protect your companies. I think more than ever, this has been one of the hardest years for HR leaders. So today I want to introduce you to a skill that I believe will help you create that better normal. It will help you as an HR leader shift a lot of the ownership of this change, not just to your HR team, but to all of the employees in your organization. And it will shift the model of how you engage, not just in face-to-face meetings with body language, but in a model that allows consistent engagement and learning that creates a sustained model for collaboration in your business culture. And the answer, that skill, is what I call connectional intelligence. Connectional intelligence is the capability to unlock new and unrealized value by fully harnessing the power of our networks and relationships. We all know what IQ is, and 15 years ago, emotional intelligence came to stage. Emotional intelligence was really built for face-to-face office interactions that were built around body language and reading emotions. In a world where we're working digitally, in a world where we're working on and off screens, where even when we go back to face-to-face meetings, we know that roughly 50% of the people may be working virtually and joining those meetings online, where we know that video meetings actually only get about 5% of our traditional body language because we see zero body gestures. We also deal with screen freezes and echoes and the fact that it's not natural actually to see our face on the screen when we're trying to look at other people and lack eye contact pretty much entirely. We need a third skill. We need a skill that will allow our teams to build trust and collaboration no matter the distance. We need to build this capability within our leaders to ensure that they can navigate change and uncertainty and not just look up or down, but look sideways in their organizations, across peer groups, across customer bases and beyond to really maximize the power of the networks around us. What I'm going to do now is share some stories and case studies of the power of connectional intelligence in practice. And I'd love for you to go into the chat and share, what are you resonating with most? What stories are resonating with you and why? The first story I want to share is about Colgate, a toothpaste company. A few years ago, there was a team of chemists at Colgate that were developing a new fluoride they were meshing in their toothpaste. But there was a mechanical flow problem and the fluoride was getting stuck in the equipment. It wasn't meshing well. All the best chemists internally were trying to figure it out and nobody could. It was taking months and months of time and at that point, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So finally, one of the chemists said, you know what? Why don't we ask a different network, a different group? And this was not the usual for a group of scientists who were used to having all the answers. But one teammate ended up posting this fluoride issue on a community online website called Innocentive, which is an online community for scientists. Within 2 days of posting the question, a physicist answered and solved the problem. He helped them realize that it was a physics problem, not a chemistry problem, and it was about charged particles. Colgate learned a few things from this experience. The first thing they learned is that they didn't even dare to ask the physicists at their own company because they had labeled it as a chemistry problem. The second thing they realized is the physicist that solved the problem would have never been hired by Colgate. He didn't have the traditional resume and he didn't want to work for a big company. But in today's world, as leaders, as employees, we can reimagine how we leverage insight, how we identify intelligence, and how we bring that back to solve problems in our organization. It also really allowed leaders to think about, how are we not just relying on titles of expertise to solve problems, but really thinking about what are the problems we're trying to solve and how can we broaden our questions to engage our entire employee base or networks far outside traditional silos to help bring the most innovative and best solutions to our organization. The second story I want to share is about a leading law firm based in New York City. And this story is about how the CFO of the firm noticed something peculiar happening a few years ago. He noticed that the youngest associates at the firm were billing less hours than ever before. And this was odd because they were giving them more work, not less work. But when they dug into it, they discovered something. They realized that the associates had created their own peer-to-peer Twitter type network to help each other solve cases faster. Questions such as, where do I find this legal citation? Or who's done a case like this before? And outside of clunky meetings or email exchanges, this was like a 24-hour SWAT team across offices, across practices, anytime, anywhere for peer-to-peer associates. It actually sped up productivity. It reduced the amount of consistent questions that these junior associates were asking their bosses, because instead of just asking their bosses the same 5 questions, they were leveraging themselves as a peer group and speeding up communication. And now the firm actually has an entire peer-to-peer network across different levels of the organization. And what they're finding is new and different cohorts. So it's not just junior employees that are using this. They're creating cohorts of employees that have come from competitors that are sharing competitive intelligence in a real-time online sharing group. They're identifying cohorts like working moms and dads who are sharing best practices around homeschooling and working in this time of change. And so they're really designing and using the power of online community sharing in a way that the face-to-face model would have never really done, but our online world of connectional intelligence can really do for our organizations today. And so as you think about applying this story, how can you use connectional intelligence to learn from the youngest in your organization, to allow anyone to contribute in problem solving, not just up or down, but in peer-to-peer levels, and to allow some of those new or undiscovered sources of hidden talent to share their expertise? This third story I want to share may be a known story for many of you in the industry, but it's a story about Oreo and one of their branding wins a few years ago. So many of you may be familiar with a Super Bowl in the United States. A few years ago, at one of the Super Bowls, there was a surprise blackout, and it lasted 46 minutes of the game. The lights went out. And while the players were keeping their muscles warm and everyone else was probably eating snack chips and on Twitter, Oreo as a brand decided to jump into action. And what they did is within 4 minutes of the blackout, they designed, captured, and tweeted out on Twitter an ad that said, "Power out, no problem. You can still dunk your Oreos in the dark." And this ad went absolutely viral. It was named the best ad at the Super Bowl game. It beat out every multi-million-dollar commercial that year, every other social media ad, and it was made in 4 minutes and entirely free. And so when you think about this story, you think, oh, this must have been just a social media win, but it actually wasn't. Actually, from 2 years before that game, the Oreo team had designed for connectional intelligence. They had built a cross-functional team that included advertising executives, lawyers, the social media agency, different business unit line executives, to actually come together every single month on a regular basis for 2 years and practice launching real-time ads around relevant news. And they would set aside time to do this. And it was because over those 2 years, they had built the muscle of trust, the muscle of being agile and quick. A typical ad, and Oreo actually had an ad at that Super Bowl game on TV that took 6 months of planning and legal approvals and risk approvals, took 4 minutes for the brand during that Super Bowl game. And so as we think about, as HR leaders, how are we designing for connectional intelligence? How are we not just creating productivity like the law firm story or finding innovation by learning from anyone like the Colgate story, but also designing cross-functional teams that are agile and relevant in a digital world? And how can we use some of the lessons from this story to reduce a lot of the dysfunction and the challenges that come with collaboration in our modern age? The fourth and final story I want to share is one of my favorites. It's actually about the creation of the Doritos guacamole chip. And this is a product made by Frito-Lay, but many of us may think this product came from marketing or product development or R&D or innovation, but it came from none of those business units. It actually came from the Latino Employee Resource Network at Frito-Lay. When combined as employee resource networks, the Latino network realized that when they were coming together, they were asking different questions because as a cohort, they were seeing with different perspectives. And one of the questions was, why don't we have a Doritos chip that effectively targets the Latino customer segment? They ended up coming up with a lot of ideas, one of them being a guacamole chip for Doritos. They pitched it to product innovation. Product innovation had never taken ideas or asked for ideas from diversity networks. It ended up being a $100 million product. Then the Asian network said, hey, we want to do this too. They came up with a curry chip that was a bestseller in Asia. And now every single year, the diversity networks come together to solve for product ideas around certain customer segments. And as we think about the power of diversity, the power of inclusion, the power of belonging, it is not only about creating diversity and inclusion events, it is about maximizing our cognitive diversity to drive innovation and business growth. And so as we think about creating cultures of belonging today, I'd like to encourage us all to think about the power of connectional intelligence to do just that. And this story really shifting diverse employees, not just as recruiters or those to drive engagement, but as business change agents that can drive new business initiatives that can really transform growth for the business. As I shared all of these stories, I want you to think for a minute. I want you to think about, where do you struggle the most when it comes to you as an HR leader and you in your organization when it comes to connectional intelligence? Is it that there's a lot of duplicative work happening across silos? If you know where the chat is in your online tool, go ahead and share where you struggle the most. Is it Zoom fatigue? Is it the fact that your organization has too many emails, too many meetings? So we're not talking about connecting more, we're talking about connecting intelligently, which is a big part of my message. It's about reducing unneeded and bureaucratic emails and meetings and Zoom and screen fatigue to make sure that you're optimizing connection in the right way. Or is it simply the overwhelm of email or the need to bridge and train your leaders on connectional intelligence so they're really leveraging digital and remote work in the most effective ways? Go ahead and think about this because we'll really use this as a way to apply the lessons that I'll be sharing. Now what I'd like to do is really segment the rest of this keynote in two parts. First, I want to talk about 5 leadership principles, what any leader can use to implement connectional intelligence. And what I really do in my keynotes and training programs within companies and organizations is actually walk through and help leaders map and score themselves and assess themselves on connectional intelligence. But today I'm going to give you the highlights so that you can put it into practice. As I go through each of these 5 leadership principles, I want you to note down, where's your greatest opportunity? Where are you strong, but where can you improve as an HR leader? Because in many ways, I see you as the super connectors of connectional intelligence across the entire organization and beyond. The first key leadership principle is that brevity can create confusion. The pressure to communicate quickly can lead us all into sometimes taking shortcuts or leaving out context altogether. And so as we think about, really engaging effectively today, I like to share a true story between 2 colleagues, Adriel and Brian. Adriel's the leader of a team. She, one Thursday, has an idea for a project that Brian's working on. So she sends him a no subject calendar invitation for the next morning for an hour at 8 a.m. Brian thinks he's about to get fired. There's lots of layoffs happening in the company. He doesn't sleep the whole night. He can't think about the work. He gets into the meeting. Adriel says, I want to talk about the client. Brian admits he thought he was about to get fired. While this may seem astronomical, the honest truth is that as leaders, to actually practice connectional intelligence is to start by connecting smartly, to never confuse a brief message with a clear message, and always making sure that we are equipping others in our organization and training others in our organization to know what to do next with our messages. The second key principle is to have a communicate your mind mindset. Now, what does this mean? What this really means is in all of our messages, we have to understand that people can't read our mind. We don't have the body language cues. Even as I mentioned before in video, we only get about 5% of what we see and engage with face-to-face. We have no clear direct eye contact with individuals because we're looking at our cameras when other people are looking at us. And the reality is that in our messages, we have to make sure we're always clear verbally in oral form and in video. What is the ask? What is the priority level? Why do you and others need this? And also, how am I feeling about this? Are you grateful? Are you happy? And are you being explicit about it in a way that there's no room for miscommunication? And I'll give you 4 different examples here. So these are 4 different versions of okay on this slide. The first okay in all caps with an exclamation. For some, it feels like shouting, and for others, it feels like excitement. The second okay, for some, it's a simple acknowledgement. For others, it seems passive aggressive or angry, especially in a text message for younger employees. The third okay, for some, it's a simple question. For others, it seems accusatory with multiple question marks. And the fourth okay, for some, it feels friendly. For others, it feels immature. This is just an example of the type of miscommunication that can happen, even if we don't intend to. So really making sure we're communicating our mind and our mindset is more important than ever. The third key leadership principle of connectional intelligence is to have a hold your horses mindset. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean that less haste equals more speed. What's been happening is the speed of digital communication is actually creating cultures of groupthink. When you have 4 yes emails, it's much harder for the 5th person to say no. On a Zoom or a WebEx meeting, if you ask, does everyone agree? And everyone has to respond instantly, it doesn't really create a space for your introverts to have time to process and think, or those that are younger that don't feel comfortable speaking up as much in the virtual setting. And so really making sure you're creating a culture of thoughtfulness over speed, especially around the things that really need strategy. There's a lot of mistakes happening, a lot of mishaps, a lot of wasted work, because we're not thinking in a clear way, we're just rushing responses. One of the things I really recommend here is when leaders use connectional intelligence, they really have norms around email. They have clear response time expectations and acronyms around it. So for example, one acronym is NNTR, which means no need to respond. And that can save a lot of the fear or guilt of not responding. Or 4D in a subject line means I need this in 4 days. So someone knows they have time to think. They don't have to rush a response, and they can really think through things, versus 2H, which means I need this in 2 hours. The other thing is we're seeing a lot of anxiety when people aren't hearing back from other individuals. And I like to share what I call my anxiety level to response time curve, where if you don't hear back from someone, you start to wonder what's going on, then you may get a little angry, then you ruminate and analyze the conversation for clues, and then finally you just assume they forgot and follow up. This often happens, and it's important to really set expectations where if you don't hear back from someone, there's a cadence around following up that doesn't seem angry or rude, but is really allowing you to move forward in a way that's clear and respectful. So these are just some examples around holding your horses, but go ahead in the chat and share if there are other ways that you're really creating a culture that avoids groupthink, that creates collective creativity, and allows for thoughtfulness over just speed. The fourth key leadership principle, and this is important all the time, but more important than ever, is to assume the best intent. Now, we get messages like Tom's, like Greg's, like Jenny's, and sometimes we don't always assume the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Tom was just rushing, or maybe Greg didn't think the question marks would offend us, or Jenny's message is just a meeting request. But it can come off in a different way. And so we really have to make sure we're building cultures with our leaders all the way top down in our organizations to assume positive intent, to make sure our teams are checking for and asking others to better understand and confirm their interpretations before assuming something negative, and knowing when to switch the medium of communication. Sometimes there are emails that should be phone calls. Sometimes there are phone calls with 30 people that should be one-to-one phone connections. And so those are just some examples, but it really is important today to really up-level that culture that will really allow for a culture of connectional intelligence. And then the last key leadership principle I want to share, which is in my newest book coming out in the spring, but also in my last book on connectional intelligence, which is called Find Your Voice. Now, one of the exciting things when it comes to connectional intelligence in a digital world is that we have a lot more ways for people to find their voice. It's not just the loudest person in the team meeting room or at the cocktail party who speaks up that will get heard. It's not just the first 3 people that speak. There are actually more nuances in phone, in email, in chat tools, in video meetings where we can hear more voices and we can actually reimagine inclusion and belonging so that anyone can contribute in new and smarter ways to solve problems with us in more efficient and better ways. I want to go through and share some of the common practices around how to use connectional intelligence with those from different backgrounds, whether introverts, extroverts, across age groups, across cultures, and even across gender stylistic differences. And as I go through this, what I really want to do is encourage you to not get stuck in stereotypes. I'm going to be sharing some themes here, but to be thinking more about where do you map across these spectrums and how do you acknowledge your own bias? So you are connecting intelligently, not just in the way you like to connect, but in the ways that others like to connect with you and building that skill and capability among your leaders. So introverts. So what we often find when it comes to introverts is that introverts really like that open line of communication outside of just the endless Zoom or WebEx meeting. They want clear agendas. What are the questions you want me to answer in the meeting in advance so I have time to think about it? Don't interrupt their speaking. Making sure there is clear cadence. The mute button can really reduce creative flow and concentration. So having a process, saying we'll do 90 seconds for each person, for example, can really help with this versus just saying who wants to speak up and then everyone talking over each other. And having downtime in between meetings, the 6-hour virtual meeting is not healthy. Yes, it works for certain blocks, but not every day. Extroverts want something different. They want video meetings, they need time, so you have to manage that airtime. They can use breakout rooms or pre-meeting brainstorms or a meeting moderator. And so really this is a spectrum. People are not just either or, but it's helpful to think about where do you map and how are you connecting intelligently across all levels of your organization, as well as building this capability among your leaders. The second type is, I like to say, I don't like to think in terms of age groups because generations are really just a manifestation of the way the world is changing. But in the world of connectional intelligence, in my research, it's really, I like to say it's a spectrum of 2 categories: digital natives, people that grew up with technology and are very comfortable with it. They love remote working, to digital adapters who feel like they're in a foreign country. They're immigrants to a new world of remote work, and they're learning a new language every day. And I'll just mention that this is not just age-based. I know 50-year-olds that just want to text all the time and act like digital natives. And I know 32-year-olds that are digital adapters entirely and can't wait to get back to the office. So digital natives really, when it comes to connectional intelligence, thrive in informal mediums, text tools, virtual chat tools, IM tools. They have voicemail phobia. They won't listen to your voicemail. They'll expect you to have emailed them or scheduled a call. There's more of a consistent use or common norms with each channel. And I like to use my father. My father is 74 years old. And when I send him a text message, he'll respond with "Dear Erica" and end with "Love Dad." And I have to scroll through the message. And I haven't taught him yet that it's really not a letter, but that's just a difference in cue and understanding of the cues that a digital adapter has versus a native. And they have frequent shorter messages. Whereas digital adapters across the spectrum, and you could be right in the middle also, have more of that preference for phone or in person. They have more of a reluctance for new technology, more of an inconsistent use of each channel. So text like it's email and vice versa, or using multiple tools versus really using one tool for one thing, and having higher quality or longer messages. I'd love for you, if you're using the chat tool in the app, go ahead and share which one are you? Are you a native? Are you an adapter? Are you in the middle? And it will also give us a feel of where is everyone at among these spectrums. The third type I want to share, and this is really more along the lines of if you run a global team, and I have a whole session on connectional intelligence across global cultures, so I can't do everything today. I'm just going to give you some highlights. But really what I want to do is talk about some general themes when it comes to digital communication in connectional intelligence across cultures. And I really want to echo that to not get stuck in the stereotypes. These are themes based on surveys I've done with my global clients. They're not going to work for every organization. And when I work with organizations, we always adapt it and customize it. But what we find in certain Eastern cultures like China, Japan, Korea, especially in digital communication, there's more likely the title, the use of a surname, more context and background needed to connect intelligently. In certain cultures, including Japan specifically, asking for a response to confirm work requests is incredibly important, especially in Japanese culture where you're on a team meeting and you ask a Japanese colleague to do something. They may say yes, but that may mean, yes, I acknowledge your request. They may not disagree with you because of a culture of saving face in a room or in a virtual room. And so making sure you're having one-on-ones is really important. And also greeting people before asking for something. And I'll say that one's also important, not just in certain Eastern cultures, but also for people in Louisiana or southern parts of the US versus Boston or New Yorkers as well. And then more traditionally in Western cultures, connecting intelligently is about being direct and to the point. People expect you've read the message. There's no need for non-work niceties unless, there's a crisis situation. And it doesn't require the CC of bosses or managers, especially when peers are connecting. And particularly in certain companies we've worked with in India, a lot of times you need to go through that more senior person because of hierarchy, cultural dynamics. The last one I want to share, and really the goal of this is for you to just really reflect and think about how are you engaging and connecting intelligently with those that are different than you. And that every culture and organization is different, but really what I wanted to do is give you a cross-section of examples. Now, fourth, when it comes to helping you find your voice and also others finding their voice, what we're seeing is that when it comes to gender stylistic dynamics, it's not women versus man. It really is specifically in digital communication, masculine styles of communicating versus feminine styles of communicating. And I want to just give you some examples of these different styles. And the point is to really think about, as an HR leader, what is the style of your company? How are you creating safe spaces with those with different styles to speak up, but also acknowledge digital biases or unconscious biases that may be emerging. And I have a whole different session on connectional intelligence applied to diversity and inclusion, where this could really probably apply to many of you. So masculine styles of connectional intelligence in communication are things like people that are equally confident in digital and face-to-face. They focus on quick response time, skip proofreading, messages are short to the point, they have more assertive language, versus a feminine style might be more of that preference for face-to-face, more niceties in the message, longer, more thoughtful, proofread messages, and more emotive language, whether it's emojis or intensive adverbs, hashtags, and beyond. And I'll say that I want to be very clear that this is not women or man. This is masculine styles versus feminine styles. So in certain business cultures, I know women that have very masculine styles and men that have very feminine styles. So it's not man or women. And, a lot of it depends on who you're trying to serve. So I know financial services companies that are trying to sell to millennial women, and they have to adopt a feminine style of communication. I know financial services firms that are entirely a masculine style of communication. I know pharmaceutical companies that are trying to reach nurses, and so they have to engage with a feminine style and beyond. So this is just a way to really acknowledge also, where do you map across the spectrum? And how do we create cultures where people can find their voice across different styles as well? So really what I just did is I shared 5 key leadership principles. And I hope that you'll be able to take those principles and implement them as an HR leader, but really also in my workshops and in my assessment tools that I do with clients. I hope you'll be able to think about how could you apply some of those with the leaders that you train in your organization, with your learning programs, to really make sure that we're building this capability, not just of IQ, not just of emotional intelligence, but connectional intelligence in our digital age. Now what I'd like to do is share what I call the 4 key organizational principles around how to put connectional intelligence into practice as an HR leader. And as I share these 4 principles actually map back to an assessment that I use with my clients, but you're getting a version of it today to really help measure how leaders are using connectional intelligence, to give them scores, and to really allow them to continuously improve over time to using it not only as leaders, but with their teams across business silos, and then across any external networks, whether it's customers, business partners, competitors across the industry, you name it. As I go through each of these four, feel free to note down, what are you taking away? Because I'd love to ask you in the chat to share any commitments as well that you'd like to take away from this session. So the first key principle when it comes to connectional intelligence in your organization is that we have to value others visibly. And valuing visibly used to mean having everyone go to a cocktail hour together, taking everyone out to dinner, flying and meeting people and looking at them face to face, giving that handshake, sharing that thank you, walking by their office, taking them out to lunch. A lot of that is gone, let's be honest, in our changed world. And so valuing visibly, I like to say, is valuing people's time, valuing their inboxes, valuing their calendars. I like to say valuing people's time is the new art of respect. We talk about EQ. Respecting people starts with respecting their time. So for example, if we cancel meetings last minute, or we're double booked and we delay our team members, or we don't show up to meetings, or we tell people we don't know why we're meeting when an agenda was actually sent, we're not valuing people visibly. So what does valuing people visibly look like today in our new norm, not just in old school traditional EQ, but what I like to call connectional intelligence for the 21st century age? It means watching the clock, starting meetings on time, ending them on time, not doing what Adriel did to Brian or John and Sarah had as an exchange, but really helping people do their best work and be motivated. It means acknowledging individual differences, knowing how to engage introverts and extroverts, sending those meeting agendas in advance, having specific times where people can speak, using the virtual chat tool so that everyone can share their thoughts in the virtual chat tool. And then you as a meeting host can call on people with different or diverse ideas, which is really important because what we often see is the first 3 people that speak in a meeting end up driving the rest of the meeting. And they're often the most senior people or the people that feel most comfortable versus some of those great ideas that are desperately needed that we saw in many of those stories, like in the law firm or Colgate, in the Doritos example and beyond. And then really practicing radical recognition. As I shared, people can't read our minds now. What was implicit in traditional body language now has to be explicit in the body of our digital body language. And so whether that's really verbally sharing shout outs of the week with your team in the team meetings, creating spaces to share wins of the week, really calling out people, even including and CCing those that worked really hard on things with your senior leaders versus keeping them out of things, show recognition in our new age and are very important. The second key principle when it comes to implementing connectional intelligence in your culture is that we have to create cultures that communicate carefully. And I already talked a lot about this, but I like to describe it through a true story of one of my clients, where one of my clients sent a text message to his boss, Tom, about a high priority meeting. And it said, "Tom, do you want to speak Wednesday or Thursday?" And Tom's response was yes. Now, maybe Tom was just multitasking, maybe he was rushing, maybe he was on another call during this, but the honest truth is that reading messages carefully is the new art of listening, and writing clearly is the new art of empathy. And so, many people right now are talking about listening skills and engagement skills, but a lot of that content was built for the face-to-face office. What I've been studying for the last 10 years is how do we connect intelligently no matter the distance. And so we really have to build that muscle differently and create this capability within our leaders. So that means really creating a capability around thinking before you type, delivering with that maniacal clarity, and also making sure, this is incredibly important, that your leaders are choosing, and all of your managers as well, are choosing the right channel and creating a culture where people are not emailing and slacking and phoning and IMing all at the same time, that they're not adding more tools when that tool isn't replacing an existing tool. So don't add Microsoft Teams without it being clear when you're going to use Microsoft Teams and when you're going to email and beyond. The third key organizational principle of connectional intelligence, and they build on each other. So once you value visibly, then you communicate carefully. The third one is collaborate confidently. And collaborating confidently is really about creating a culture of confidence where people say and commit to what they'll do. They keep their word, they keep their promises, and they follow through. They don't live in an endless fear of having to follow up 24/7 and worrying about whether other functions will say, or dealing with turf wars, or not having accountability on who's doing what, and then dealing with overlap and beyond. So I want to start with, what does confidence not look like when it comes to collaboration? So recently, here are some of the things we've been seeing with clients. When a team member says, I need a report by the end of the week, but then that team member has the team rework it for 2 months because they didn't know what they wanted. Or they say, I'll get back to you soon, but they get back to you in 2 weeks with half an answer. Or they say, I need something by tomorrow morning. And it's really not urgent, and it's just rushed and not thoughtful. These don't create a lot of confidence. And it's okay to not have the answers, like in the second one, but being consistent in our messages is really incredibly important right now, because we don't have the office. We don't have that water cooler that we used to have. And so when it comes to collaborating confidently, a lot of that is about creating a cadence with your team to make sure you're informing the right people at the right times. So as you think about projects, when will we integrate different people? How will we leverage the wisdom of the Oreo-like cross-functional SWAT team to build the agility, to not just have static regular meetings with Gantt charts, but to really make sure we're practicing the muscle of collaboration when we need it most? How will we avoid cultures of reply all and 30-person meetings when they really should be 6-person meetings, and then a meeting summary and a recording of the meeting should be sent to the other 20 people who can share their thoughts virtually by email and catch up while a core set of people continue to do the work? Prioritize and stay on track. This is incredibly important. Collaborating confidently today is helping your teams stay on track. We can't just think in quarterly priorities. We can't even just think in monthly priorities. We have to also think about weekly and daily. Remember, team members are just trying to get through the day. They're homeschooling in the morning, then they're working in the afternoon, and then they're teaching their kids again, and then they're doing work late at night. There's no more 9 to 5. We shouldn't think that way. We have to think in an environment where we're helping our teams do their best work. One of the things I often recommend is, as leaders, hosting virtual office hours, where there's at least 1 hour a day where your team knows you're available to them. They can ping you, they can call you, they can email you, and you'll respond. So instead of scheduling 30 minutes or an hour on your calendar for really a 5-minute question, they can get to you very quickly. And paying attention to those details. We're seeing actually a lot of executives being very sloppy right now because they used to rely on their admin assistant who was next to them to get things done. And they have to build the skill of connectional intelligence now. And they're not always responding quickly as they should. And so really equipping leaders in paying attention to the details is important. Again, this is not about having more communication. This is about reducing and killing inefficient meetings and emails and really optimizing for connecting not more, but intelligently. I want to also share something that I do with clients, which is creating a culture where there's clear collaboration norms. And this is often very important when it comes to creating a culture that collaborates confidently. This is an example of a workshop I led with a client and some of the things we did, where we identified all the different tools that people can use, when to use them, what the response time expectations, and what are the norms around them. And while this may seem trivial, it's actually more important than ever in our digital setting to really make sure that people know when to use channels. And I like to really define it in 3 different categories. The first is helping your leaders understand the complexity of the information. So does it need attachments? Does it need brainstorming? Like in the Sarah John story, then it's really an email or a video meeting. Is it urgent? What's the urgency level? If it's needed in 10 minutes, it's really the text message or the chat tool during 9 to 5. And also, what's the formality level? Is this a senior person where you really need to email them to get on their calendar and beyond? So really having a checklist and going through and making sure that your teams are adhering to collaboration norms is incredibly important. It's a waste of time to add more tools to the system without people knowing what does that tool replace and how will it save me time and improve and optimize communication instead of creating more communication. The fourth and final key principle to implement connectional intelligence is what I call trusting totally. Now, let's be honest, trust is hard. We build these blocks. When you value visibly, communicate carefully, collaborate confidently. The fourth step is creating that culture of 360-degree trust. But in a world where there's silence and lack of tone and concern and all the uncertainty we're facing, it's hard to build trust. So when it comes to building a culture that trusts totally, really focusing on equipping your leaders and managers to give the benefit of the doubt, to create those virtual water cooler moments, even just having regular practices for your teams where you're sharing asking them, what's bad news I don't want to hear? Tell me bad news, to create that culture where people feel comfortable speaking up, or what's a win of the week and what's challenging, or to do virtual office hours, whatever it may be for you, to create that culture of trust that I can get to people and I feel like I can reach out. And also showing your vulnerabilities. This has been a really unique time where we've seen digital natives actually teach digital adapters, often those senior in an organization, how to use video tools, how to up their game online. And also we're seeing digital adapters teaching digital natives how to make sure their virtual background is professional and okay, especially in customer calls and beyond. So I just walked you through a set of best practices. But what I'm excited to share is that I put this all in a free guide for you, where you can actually get all of the 4 principles I shared in a checklist to help you measure yourself as an HR leader and bring some of these best practices to your own teams. So if you go to my website at ericadhawan.com/dbl, you can get that there. And what that also includes is a document with best practices for email, for video communication, for phone calls and beyond. So you can use that best practice checklist to more effectively start your own collaboration norms within your organization. This is just a preview of some of the things included in that guide, but really having a checklist so that you can map back how are you modeling and role modeling connectional intelligence, whether it's making sure time is respected or common stakeholders are aligned and beyond, or there's consistency in communications, are things that can really help you as well as your leaders get big things done in our digital age. And without further ado, we're going to move into Q&A in a minute. But what I'd like you all to do, and I'd encourage you to do, is really think about one action you're taking away from this session that you can bring as a leader and also to your teams. And if you enjoyed this session, my life's work, I've been speaking on connectional intelligence for 10 years. My last book is called Get Big Things Done, The Power of Connectional Intelligence. But I work with a lot of organizations in keynotes, in workshops and assessments, and train the trainers. And so if any of these topics resonate, there's lots of different ways we can apply it for you. And I also have a new book that's coming out in the spring called Digital Body Language. So if you're trying to learn about how to adapt connectional intelligence in a digital age, I shared lots of the insights from the book in this session today. And I'm doing that with all my clients, but you can definitely check it out online on Amazon. But most importantly, I really want to thank you again for joining the keynote portion before we go into the Q&A portion of this session. I truly believe that this is a moment that HR leaders are leading the way, are making sure that executives, leadership teams are not just coping with the new normal, but creating a better normal. My whole session today was not about remote work, was not about even working digitally. It was really about leadership in a 21st century marketplace, global, matrixed, virtual, multi-generational, you name it. And so I hope you'll check out the tools, the guide on my website. I'll have that available for the next 48 hours for all of you to download. Check out my book, Get Big Things Done. I also have a podcast, or reach out to me. My email's here if you have any questions or thoughts. But I'd like to thank you all so much again for joining this session. And in close, before we go to Q&A, I'd really like to leave us all with a question. And that is, how will you connect intelligently for all of those around the world, really, that are counting on your wisdom, your creativity, and your heart? I'll pass it on now to Julie, who's going to join me in the Q&A.
Thank you, Erica. That was wonderful. So if you have questions for Erica, please use the Ask button at the bottom left side of your screen. If you don't see it, just exit full screen and it'll show up at the bottom, a little purple thing. So Erica, just to start off, this year, one thing our employees are really struggling with is anxiety and fear of the unknown and the known. What advice do you have for our folks on the call today of just dealing with that uncertainty and stress?
That is a great question. It was the topic of my monthly newsletter today, and I wish I could like pull it up for you. It was transforming anxiety into productive action. I think that's the big piece. There's a lot of anxiety at all levels. I mean, and you can't even compartmentalize it because there's different types of anxiety sources with different solutions, whether it's the cohort dealing working parents right now, whether it's people solo and working alone and dealing with loneliness, the other end of the spectrum, whether it's people navigating just the news, people, engulfed, whether it's the election or social injustices, whatever you name it. I really do believe that there's a few key things that leaders can do. The first is help provide coping frameworks for your people. Because at the end of the day, we can't just move into words like resilience and well-being without practical tools that role model that. So don't just have a PowerPoint saying, we're gonna do 5 sessions on resilience. Nobody wants to see another PowerPoint, and I'm sorry you had to see one today, but one example, one CEO client of mine of a multi-billion-dollar company, he just started 30-minute meditations at 11 a.m. 3 times a week. And the last one yesterday had 200 people on them. So instead of just having a big webinar, actually practice it. Create, as leaders, create little blocks, 15 minutes, a 15-minute meditation where your employees can come and you can really, as leaders, role model this. Because what we're finding is if the change isn't starting at the top, what also is happening is leaders are inundated in Zoom or video meetings all day, not dealing with and creating resilience themselves and not role modeling that down. So one key aspect is creating those coping frameworks, but model and practice it. And then the second thing is use connectional intelligence to reduce a lot of that anxiety. A lot of what I shared, a lot of the stories I shared stem from anxiety. There's a lack of clarity. There's a lot of ambiguity. And so for you as leaders, making sure you're building the capability of telling your teams, here's what we know and here's what we don't know. And that's okay. And communicating in a way where those messages are not just brief, but there's clear on here's what you can do now and here's what we'll wait for, will actually reduce a lot of that unnecessary anxiety that we're seeing in the workplace today. So those are just a few examples. And if you want, actually, I'll be posting my newsletter today on my LinkedIn profile. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see actually a more detailed set of tools around that and a tool around ending digital burnout, which is just a big part of anxiety as well.
Awesome. We just got a question in. Any advice or tips for maintaining mental and physical well-being while working remotely?
Yes, a lot of it has to do with, the first aspect that I talk about in my sessions with clients around connectional intelligence, which starts with killing unneeded emails, meetings, and screen time. We can't just add unless we're stopping something. So anytime you're adding something to the mix, clarify what are you going to stop doing as well. I'm seeing a lot of screen fatigue. So I've advised a lot of clients to, at least internally when you can, have the video meetings before 2 p.m. because after that, there's a lot of exhaustion. Instead of doing 30-minute meetings, try 12-minute meetings. You can get the same things done if you have clear agendas. Have rules. Don't accept a meeting unless there is a clear agenda and outcome in the meeting invite. It can transform the quality. People get to the point quickly. And as I mentioned earlier, valuing visibly is valuing their time, where they're not just listening to 30 people talk over one another in the typical call. So that's the first thing. At Sprint, actually, one of the things they did is an exercise called Kill Stupid Meetings, where they rated the quality of meetings. And so even simple things like rating, was this meeting productive at the end? And how could we make it better on a regular basis? Will build a cadence to really supercharge that skill that we sometimes, I'll include myself, we're more lazy around because we were face-to-face in the office and it was just easier. Another thing is use email acronyms. I talked about acronyms like NNTR, 2H, or 4D. these can really reduce a lot of the rush that I need to respond to everything immediately. And as I mentioned, if we don't hold our horses, we're creating cultures of groupthink that are reducing efficiency and creating a lot of, I like to say, especially with cross-team communication, it used to be that there was about 5 interactions before a deliverable was done. Now there's like 40 turns of a document, and it's just inefficient. And then also making sure your leaders are ultra clear and not letting them off the hook. So I'll give you an example. There's a chief marketing officer I work with. She was reviewing a deliverable on Zoom, and she made a comment, let's iterate on this topic a little more. That was verbatim her comment. Her team ended up spending about 30 hours creating 10 slides. She was looking for 2 more bullet points, but she wasn't clear. And that just goes back to actually reducing and improving the mental health is helping people do their job in a clear way so that they can get off the screen more than just being on the screen.
So Erica, we have a question. What advice can you share with our C2HR attendees who want to make meaningful connections with an industry colleague today and throughout the conference, but maybe feeling a little awkward about it? Like, how do we truly connect well with new people in a digital way?
This is a fantastic question. And I think it really stems to another element, which is connectional intelligence can be used across the C2HR community. And how can we use this moment and continue to use the community to share knowledge and best practices, similar to the law firm example, similar to that Colgate example. So if you imagine all those stories that I shared at the beginning, I mean, all of us are facing unique challenges as leaders, but there could be a lot of duplicative work we're doing in our own organization where we can leverage best practices. So one thing I'd recommend in the chat tool on the app today is share 5 things that you can help others with, that you have figured out in the last 6 months. It could be, I figured out how to onboard my employees virtually. I figured out, I have a great speaker for diversity and inclusion efforts, or we've really done a great job engaging and figuring out how to optimize or improve our Zoom meetings. And then 5 things you need help with. And instead of just people that know each other finding each other, we're using the power of what do people need and where can they help, and matching people together. And so I'd encourage you to do that today, to really find those in the community that you know, but also even those that you don't know well, because maybe it's like the Colgate story, that chemist type person that can help you solve what was actually a physics problem, and vice versa.
I love that. Recently, I've had a few people reach out to me who I haven't talked to in ages, and really awkward, like, how do I broach the subject? I need some help. And the truth is, we're all happy to help. We love being asked for help, and we love participating. So I've been working on some really cool projects with folks I haven't talked to in ages, and I love it. So I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So how can we tap into the power of connectional intelligence to help us accelerate some of the impacts of our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that might have cooled down a little bit with all the crazy that's been happening in the world?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in the last 10 years since I led my original research at Harvard around applying connectional intelligence to D&I. And I'm more excited than ever because there's a resurgence, and it's always been important, but even a more focus on it for many senior leaders today. And I would say there's a couple of key things related to connectional intelligence. The first is in D&I. The first is for many of you that have employee resource groups or women's networks or underrepresented minority groups, connectional intelligence is a wonderful tool and a skill that they can build as a leadership capability, especially in leadership programs, to really help get many high-performing diverse talent to those senior levels. Secondly, I've done a lot of workshops applying connectional intelligence in the spirit of that Doritos guacamole chip example to the business. So how can your diverse employees come together and solve business challenges and drive innovation for the business, just like the Latino network and now many of their networks do for the business. I've also seen connectional intelligence really be effectively used where I've done programs applying it across chapters. So not just with a women's network or an African-American network, but leveraging the power of getting different diverse employees together digitally to share ideas and best practices. And as diversity and inclusion leaders not just having one-off approaches, but using connectional intelligence to think about how to engage all of the knowledge within the different efforts you're doing in a streamlined way to really elevate it overall, and to create a culture where D&I is not just event driven, but in a similar fashion of the law firm story, where you're creating online communities that are engaging in regular, sustained ways to share knowledge and expertise and create cultures around speaking up, around issues that matter, that go beyond the functional meeting that a diversity leader has to plan, or one-off emails that may only get to certain people, but not to a broader cohort or group. Those are just some examples, but if you're interested in learning more about that, feel free to email me and I'm happy to share more with you.
Thanks, Erica. I think we're out of time, but I wanted to try sneak in one little question that just popped up. So many of the folks on the call are client-facing HR folks, and we have a question about how can we effectively begin to propose connectional intelligence to our clients?
I think that this is, I truly believe that in this industry, especially, connectional intelligence is everything. You're constantly connecting, and one of the ways, I think the best way to introduce connectional intelligence is encourage them to check out my book called Get Big Things Done, The Power of Connectional Intelligence. I did the original research on connectional intelligence 10 years ago, and my book really talks about the different skills that we shared and is a great introduction. But you can also get a 2-pager on my website. If you go to ericadhawan.com, and there's a 2-pager there. If you sign up, it's called Free Report on the site, and you can get the free report. And it's a great download that can give you some stories and some tools around how to introduce these ideas to your clients. And I'd also really say, especially when it comes to this industry, we all know that the future of this industry is not just about social media or digital connection. It really is about creating the Netflix or the Hulu-like mentality of the anytime, anywhere way of engaging with our clients. It involves us to think about not just going in person and having a live meeting, but the YouTube-like engagement or the TED-like pitches that are virtual. And so, a lot of my content can apply for how can you effectively build these capabilities to better engage clients, but also really designing experiences virtually for your clients that will engage them regardless of distance and beyond. And happy to talk more. I do a lot of virtual events, especially with my new book coming out, for client events that will allow them to learn and engage in some of this content.
Thank you, Erica. Really appreciate it. That's fantastic. And what a great way to kick off our C2HR conference. So we're not able to share Erica's slide deck, but for those of you who want to learn more, go to her site. It's amazing. There's a lot of great information, materials, etc. And I subscribe to her newsletter, and we get a lot of great thought-provoking ideas and actionable insights. So thank you, Erica. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we're at the end of our morning session. Please tune back in today at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern time for our next session called Inclusive Conversations for the Health of HR. This is going to be an interactive discussion, so we hope you can join us. Thanks, everyone.
put the ultimate in high-fidelity music listening within the reach of everyone. The tape is now completely rewound, ready for play. All in thrilling new sound. tape is now completely rewound. Ready for play.
All in thrilling new sound.